Story 1. Disclaimer: this is not my story. It was shared with me by a close friend who gave me permission to post it here. This account is based on what I was told and recollect from memory. On the day of the encounter with this prime example of a difficult customer, my friend had gone shopping at a large retail chain, where the employees typically wear blue shirts and dark-colored pants, a favorite spot for individuals like the one in this story. According to my friend, he had been shopping for about an hour when he heard the unmistakable sound of someone clearing their throat behind him. Without even turning around, he said loudly and clearly, "I don't work here," grabbed what he needed from the shelf, and continued on with his shopping. "How rude," she suddenly shouted at him. "Get back here, I am a customer." "So am I," he yelled back, just as loudly. "Go mind your own business, you rude, unpleasant old woman." My friend doesn't take any disrespect from anyone and will give it back if someone is rude to him. According to him, the woman stood there, mouth wide open, as if she couldn't believe someone had responded to her in the same manner she had dished out. At that moment, 3 men in business suits entered the other end of the aisle, having been drawn by the commotion. The woman immediately noticed them and rushed over, quickly turning on the waterworks. She fabricated a story about how she had politely asked an employee for help, only to be insulted and threatened in return. Of course, she then made the typical demand all difficult customers seem to think they can make: "I want him fired, now." One of the men, who happened to be a police officer, calmly replied, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't work here. I can't fire him." What the woman didn't realize was that the 3 men had overheard the entire exchange and had stepped into the aisle to investigate. "Don't lie to me. You're a manager. Fire him right now," she screamed so loudly that the men actually took a step back. "Ma'am, please calm down and stop yelling. I can't fire him. I do not work here, and I'm not a—" He didn't get a chance to finish because the woman, now enraged and clearly not thinking, pulled out a small can of pepper spray and sprayed him directly in the face. The other 2 men, both police officers, reacted instantly. They were on her in a second, taking her down forcefully and handcuffing her in under 30 seconds, although it likely took a minute or 2. The officers identified themselves and informed her that she was under arrest for assaulting a police officer with a weapon, the pepper spray. She lay on the floor, shrieking that they weren't real police officers and that they were lying, all while demanding that my friend be arrested for daring to refuse her commands. A regular patrol car was called to pick her up, and they kept her restrained until uniformed officers arrived. They ended up having to drag her out of the store. It turns out they had to subdue her so forcefully that she knocked out a tooth when she hit the ground. Afterward, my friend walked over to the officers and asked if they needed anything from him. They said no, but he left his contact information with them just in case they needed a witness. They thanked him, and he went on with his shopping. In the end, the woman accepted a plea deal that resulted in her serving 1 year and 1 day in prison, 5 years of parole, and 2,500 hours of community service. The judge really threw the book at her, considering the plea deal's limits. And my friend got a fantastic story to share. Note: the officer recovered fully and suffered no lasting effects from the pepper spray. Story 2. My aunt was one of 2 children my grandparents had. My mother was the complete opposite of my aunt. She started working at the age of 12 in my grandfather's shop, never asked for anything, and eventually managed to start her own business. On the other hand, my aunt didn't hold a steady job until she was 26, was constantly stealing from her parents, and frequently found herself in trouble. Despite her behavior, my grandmother spoiled my aunt and her kids. My aunt had 3 children from 3 different men, none of whom were her first husband, if you catch my drift. No matter what my aunt or her kids did, my grandmother always defended them. She rarely had time for my mom and her children, unless it was to get something from us. The only reason my mom visited her was because she loved my grandfather. In 2004, my grandfather passed away, and a few months later, my grandmother decided to draft a new will. Both my mother and aunt were present when she signed it, so they knew its contents. The will stated that, upon her passing, the house would be sold, and the money split evenly 25% to my mom, 25% to my aunt, and the remaining 50% would go to the grandchildren. At the time, the house was worth more than £500,000, so while it wasn't life-changing, it would have been a decent inheritance. In 2010, my mom died in an accident and didn't have an updated will. Since she no longer owned her business and was renting a house, she didn't have much of monetary value. The only thing that mattered to her was her funeral arrangements, and she had shared her wishes with me. She was specific about everything: the music, the flowers, the color of the coffin, and even what people should wear. She wanted bright, warm colors at the funeral. When she passed away, my aunt and grandmother took over the funeral arrangements and attempted to undo everything I told them. The music choices were songs my mother disliked, the flowers were the wrong colors, and the coffin they chose was just awful. With the help of my siblings, we managed to correct some of the details, but we couldn't change the coffin, and my grandmother refused to let people come dressed in anything but black, despite my mom's wishes for bright colors. It was incredibly frustrating. After the funeral, my grandmother altered her will. My aunt informed us that she had no involvement in the changes, and my grandmother claimed that she updated the will to ensure my mom's share would go to her children instead. We accepted that and moved on. However, after my mom's death, my grandmother stopped talking about her entirely. At first, we thought it was due to the grief of losing her daughter, but even 5 years later, she still wouldn't mention my mom. If someone brought up a story about my mom, my grandmother would quickly change the subject, often steering the conversation back to how difficult my aunt and her kids had it. It hurt, especially since I had suffered a mental breakdown after losing my mom, only to hear things like, "Well, your aunt has had it much worse." In 2016, my grandmother passed away. She had written down her funeral preferences, which eerily mirrored the choices she had made for my mom's funeral, right down to the music. It seemed like she had tried to use my mom's funeral as a sort of rehearsal for her own. A couple of months later, my siblings and I were waiting to hear about the will reading. My aunt kept telling us, "Oh, it'll be another month before the reading can happen." I didn't mind, as I wasn't particularly concerned about the money. However, my older brother was hoping to use his share to fund a honeymoon, and my younger brother was about to start university, so the money would have been very helpful. Eventually, my dad ran into the solicitor who had handled my grandmother's will. When he asked about it, the solicitor let slip that the will had already been read and that everything had been left to my aunt. Shocked, my dad questioned this, and the solicitor confirmed that my aunt had been present when the will was drafted, despite her earlier promises that she had no involvement. When confronted, my aunt initially denied everything but eventually admitted to lying. She showed us the will, which confirmed what we already suspected. The house and all its contents were left to her, including my grandfather's war medals from his time in the Second World War. I reminded her that my grandfather had promised the medals to me before he passed, to which she responded, "Unless you have that in writing, you get nothing from this house. Besides, I already gave the medals to Clive." My heart sank. Clive, not his real name, was her eldest son and had a long history of trouble. He had been in and out of prison for theft and was involved in illegal activities. I knew the moment he got his hands on my grandfather's medals, they would be sold off. We looked into taking legal action to contest the will, but every lawyer we spoke to said we likely wouldn't gain anything from it. Shortly after, my aunt put the house up for sale for nearly £750,000. She planned to sell it and move closer to her daughter, who lived in a large city. An offer was made on the house, and she put a deposit down on a new home. I thought that was the end of it, but karma had other plans. The buyers had a survey done on the property, and it revealed significant issues. The house had been built on soft ground, and it was sinking. Over the 40-plus years my grandparents had lived there, the house had sunk about 2 centimeters, but it was now sinking at a rate of 1 centimeter per year. Within 3 years, the house would need major repairs or possibly even have to be torn down. The new value of the house, £60,000. The buyers pulled out immediately, without putting down a deposit. My aunt couldn't afford her new home, but was still on the hook for the deposit. Meanwhile, she had allowed Clive to move into her council house, even though he had been banned from council properties for damaging every one he had been given. Someone reported her, and she was evicted from her home. With nowhere else to go, she had to move into my grandmother's old, crumbling house. There she was, living in a sinking house with her troublemaking son and partner. She was stuck there for 2 years. Whenever I saw her, she would try to start a conversation, but I always ignored her. One day, as I was walking away, she screamed, "Your mother deserved to die for having a useless person like you," in the middle of a busy street. Someone reported her to the police, and she received an official warning. She was also ridiculed on social media. Each time I saw her after that, she looked more and more miserable. Eventually, she sold the house for about £85,000 and moved in with her daughter in a big city. I lost contact with her and her children after that. I thought karma had finally run its course. But it turns out, karma wasn't done yet. I later ran into one of her former friends, who filled me in on what happened after she left our town. My aunt moved into her daughter's home, let's call her Sue. But Sue's house had only 3 bedrooms and 3 children. My aunt and her partner were forced to live in the smallest room while she looked for a job and a place to rent. Even with £85,000, she couldn't afford a home. About a month later, her partner ran off, taking all her money with him. Stranded at Sue's house and contributing nothing, my aunt spent all her income on gambling. Eventually, Sue and my aunt got into a heated argument, during which my aunt said, "I should have never had you." Sue immediately kicked her out. Now, my aunt was left in a big city where she knew no one, had no money, no home, and had burned her last bridge. The last I heard, she was living in a caravan in a rough part of the city, unable to work due to early onset arthritis, which had left her unable to move her hands. I know I shouldn't find satisfaction in someone else's misfortune, but it does bring me some peace after everything that happened. Story 3. This happened a few days ago, and honestly, I'm still trying to gather myself and deal with the security issues that this whole ordeal left me with. I'm a fairly new mother to a beautiful baby boy. My husband and I were blessed with him 6 months ago. At first, everything was really difficult, but now things are starting to get better. We're learning how to manage our lives around the baby's needs and more. Let's just say we're in a good place now, even though we struggled initially, and that's what matters. A few days ago, my husband and I were visiting his parents, who live about 20 minutes away from us. We always have a wonderful time with them. They're very supportive, and my mother-in-law was a lifesaver when I first had the baby, giving me all the help I didn't even know I needed. I really love her. As I mentioned, they're lovely people, and we had a great time together. Around 7 p.m., we decided to head home. Once we were in the car, I remembered that we needed a few things for the baby and some groceries, so we decided to stop by the local store. We headed there, my husband, our baby in his stroller, and me. For the sake of this story, it's important to mention that I have a 6th degree black belt in Taekwondo. I won't go into details about my experience with the sport, but it's been a big part of my life. Anyway, we entered the store, and I started pushing the shopping cart, trying to fill it with everything we needed, hoping I wouldn't forget anything like I usually do. Meanwhile, my husband pushed the stroller with our baby, who was sleeping peacefully. Unfortunately, after only about 10 minutes of shopping, we heard the dreaded "excuse me" from behind us. We hoped it wasn't what we feared, but the tone suggested otherwise. It could easily be a mega Karen on the hunt. I turned around and saw a woman, probably in her 40s, with way too much makeup on. I hesitated to respond, but the way she stared at me left me no choice. "Yes," I said. She replied, "Hi, I've been following you for the past 10 minutes, ever since you walked into the store. I couldn't help but be fascinated by your baby's stroller, and I was wondering, where can I get one?" In my head, the math didn't add up. What she was asking was fairly normal. People see something they like and ask where to buy it. but following us for 10 minutes before asking. That didn't seem normal. Still, I decided to be polite and tell her where we got the stroller. "Oh, we bought it from X store. It's a little more expensive than some other strollers, but it's really comfortable, and we were fortunate to afford it." "Wow, that's nice," she said. "Can I ask how much you paid for it?" I gave my husband a quick, hesitant look before turning back to her. "It was around $2,000. Her jaw dropped. "Wow, that's a lot of money for a stroller. You must be rich. If you can afford something like this, you must be doing really well." We felt uncomfortable. It's never pleasant when someone assumes you're well off just because of one purchase. But we smiled awkwardly, nodded politely, and turned to continue shopping. That's when she jumped in front of us, blocking our path with an absurd demand. "So, what do you say? You give me that stroller for my baby, and you can get yourselves a brand new one since you can easily afford it, right?" We were shocked. I quickly told her, "I'm sorry, we can't do that." Then I turned to my husband and said, "We need to go." But she wasn't done. She stopped us again, placed her hand on our stroller, and yelled, "Why can't you just do one good thing in your life and give me this stroller? It's nothing to people like you. Me and my baby deserve it more anyway. You know what? I demand you help out a single mother and give me this thing." My husband responded firmly, "Get away from my family, and don't you dare follow us or try to stop us again, you crazy woman." That's when she crossed the line. She stepped in our way one last time and said something I'll never forget. "If you're going to call me crazy, then I'll show you crazy. I'll take your baby, and I won't give him back until you hand over that stroller and walk away." As she said this, she reached into the stroller, trying to grab our baby. I saw red. I never thought I'd experience that feeling, but it's real. And in that moment, I earned my Mama Bear badge. I remember seeing my husband block her hands from reaching our baby and trying to push her away. Then, out of nowhere, she hit him across the face with her purse. I don't know what happened next, but when I came to, my left foot was flying toward her head. Bam! Direct hit. She was knocked out cold and lay on the ground, motionless. My husband quickly hugged me and our baby, and we tried to leave the store. But as more people gathered, we were met by 2 security guards and the store manager. My husband warned them not to touch us, but the manager calmly asked us to wait for the police, as they had already been called. We complied and waited. The police arrived shortly after. 2 officers came to us, while the others went with the manager to check the store's security footage. By this time, the woman, Karen, was beginning to wake up. The paramedics were attending to her when she opened her eyes and started shrieking more like wailing. It was unsettling. The police were kind and didn't detain us, especially after seeing how shaken I was. They took our statements, which were confirmed by the security footage and other customers who had witnessed the incident. Karen was handcuffed, screaming at everyone around her. At one point, she even tried to attack the paramedics, but couldn't stand properly and fell to the ground again. It seemed like she had a concussion or something similar. We decided to press charges, and were prepared to take this as far as it goes. We want to ensure that this woman faces the consequences for the terror she put us through. Who knows what she would have done if she had managed to grab our baby? We will not settle. I'm even considering suing her for emotional distress on top of everything else. I'll make sure she faces justice, and I hope her child is raised by someone far better than she is. Story 4. I, 25, male, have been living away from home since graduating from college. My parents recently retired, and last summer, they decided to use some of their savings to finally build their dream retirement home in New Orleans, where they've lived for the past 10 years. I come from a very close-knit family, so I still talk to my parents weekly. They were incredibly excited when they told me they had already chosen the perfect location for their new home. It was an empty lot in a nice neighborhood, where a house had recently been demolished due to age. The previous owner, a wealthy property owner in the city, decided the lot was worth more without the house, so my parents quickly purchased it. But not long after construction began, they realized they were building their dream home next door to a troublesome neighbor. The trouble started when my parents had to cut down a large oak tree that sat in front of the lot. It was a beautiful southern live oak, and although they didn't want to remove it, they knew it had to go because it was in the way of the construction. No one likes to cut down a beautiful tree, and my parents would have avoided it if possible. So, they hired a tree removal service, and soon the tree was gone. A few days after the tree was removed, my dad was at the property, talking to the construction workers and ensuring everything was running smoothly. As he was heading back to his car, he saw a woman in her late 50s walk out of the house next door and head to her mailbox. My dad, let's call him John, is a friendly, laid-back guy who likes to get along with everyone, so he approached her and introduced himself. "Hi," he said, holding out his hand. "My name's John, and my wife and I are going to be your neighbors once our house is finished. I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" The woman glanced at his extended hand, then glared at him. "My name is none of your business," she snapped. "I'm not shaking your hand because of the current health situation, and even if it weren't for that, I still wouldn't shake your hand because you people ruined my life when you cut down my tree. You should be ashamed of yourselves." Taken aback, my dad explained that she still had a large oak tree in her backyard, but she ignored him and stormed back inside. She never explained why she believed she owned the tree that had been removed, and whenever my parents asked, she refused to answer. It's one of those unsolved mysteries, like what happened to the lost Roanoke colony. Later that day, my parents met some of their other neighbors, including a kind elderly couple who lived next to Karen. When my dad mentioned the encounter, the neighbors said Karen was difficult with everyone, and that no one in the neighborhood liked her. They added that Karen had been so unpleasant for years that they were in the process of selling their home to get away from her. Karen soon lived up to her reputation. For months, whenever my parents visited the construction site, she found something to complain about. Once, she claimed the workers were too loud and threatened to call the police, even though it was the middle of the day. Another time, she accused the construction company of hiring undocumented workers and threatened to call immigration authorities to shut the project down. My dad informed the company owner, who sent Karen a formal letter warning of legal action if she interfered. Whether there were grounds for a lawsuit or not, the threat worked, and no authorities ever came. Karen also tried to have my parents' car towed for illegal parking when they left it by the curb outside their unfinished home. The tow truck driver, however, saw where the car was parked and told Karen that if she called him again without reason, he'd send her a bill for wasting his time. I could go on, but you get the idea. Karen was relentless in her efforts to avenge a tree she didn't even own. Despite her interference, the house was completed, and my parents moved in shortly after the holidays. My mom later told me that as they carried boxes into the house, she noticed Karen bitterly watching them from her window. She worried that Karen might continue causing problems, but Karen remained quiet for a while, likely too caught up in her own frustrations. Then, a few weeks ago, things took a turn. New Orleans had been experiencing terrible weather due to winter storms affecting much of the southern US, and one night, a particularly strong storm hit. The tree in Karen's backyard was knocked over. It narrowly missed her house, but it didn't miss her shiny new Jaguar, crushing it like a can. The next morning, when Karen discovered the damage, she reportedly let out a scream that could rival a horror movie. She had to pay a tree removal service to clear the fallen tree, then pay for a tow truck to take away the wrecked car, and she also had to rent a car. Not long after, Karen put her property up for sale and moved out. The whole neighborhood was relieved to see her go, and my parents enjoyed watching her drive away from the porch of their beautiful new home. Story 5. Several years ago, when I was 18, I worked for 6 months at a daycare. My job involved rotating between classrooms to cover for other teachers who were sick or needed to leave after long shifts that often lasted 13+ hours. Here's some backstory about how they treated me. Despite receiving government funding, this daycare was extremely religious. The owner was always present, and I was the only non-Christian staff member. Having grown up in the Bible Belt, I knew better than to mention that I wasn't Christian. I didn't make the kids say grace before lunch, but never said anything negative about Christianity or God. When asked which church I attended, I simply named one I passed on my way to work. When they asked if I prayed every day, I told them I did, though I explained that I prayed in my own way, for the world's well-being rather than focusing on daily trouble, saying, "I know God has a plan for me." They harassed me constantly for not believing in God in the right way and for being depressed. One time, the owner saw me disassociating, which looks like spacing out but doesn't affect my awareness, and she accused me of not paying attention to the children. I had to explain what depression was, and she claimed I was possessed by the devil. The director, who also taught the 2-year-old class and had barely spoken to me before, once approached me to say that she used to have depression too, and that all I needed to do was drink more water and practice yoga. Anytime I passed through the kitchen, whoever saw me would remind me to drink water, and if I said I had just had some, they'd insist, "Have another." Eventually, I started ignoring their comments about my appearance. I had short blue hair, and they often asked why I didn't grow it out or wear perfume. Every Thursday during nap time, all 6 teachers, the owner, and I, along with the other aide who was younger, unmarried, and pregnant, would gather in the office. We'd hold hands, and one by one, they would tell me everything they thought was wrong with me, from the cologne I wore to how I answered phone calls from my sister, who I was taking care of. After that, they would all pray for me. This continued for more than half the time I worked there. I had just about reached my limit, as the situation was worsening my depression, and the owner became more convinced that I was possessed. She removed me from the classrooms and promoted me to Education Enrichment Manager, a made-up position with no pay raise. I was supposed to remind teachers about certifications and classes, but in reality, I became the owner's chauffeur. Despite always being at the facility before, she suddenly had numerous reasons to leave. Since she didn't have a driver's license or know how to drive, I had to take her everywhere, from daycare, grocery shopping to visiting her husband at work. Most of the time, she left me waiting in the van for 2 hours or more. One day, she spent an hour and a half grocery shopping, only to forget her wallet. She called another teacher to pick her up, leaving me in the van for 3 hours, with the keys in her purse, so I couldn't even leave. At least I had air conditioning that time. While it was frustrating, I was still getting paid and found it easy to tune out her talking and distract myself on my phone. The fallout/malicious compliance. The director of the 2-year-old class eventually left because her husband was relocated. They assigned me to the 1-year-old class, and the 1-year-old teacher was moved to teach the 2-year-olds. Our rooms were split by a baby gate, and I could see into her side. She was almost always on her phone, holding one child while ignoring the others as they played. After about 2 weeks, Thursday, prayer meetings resumed. During one of these days, I received an important call from my 14-year-old sister, who was home alone and panicking because her dog had escaped. The director called the company phone, which another teacher brought to me, to ask why I was on my phone. She was watching me through the cameras. I tried to explain the situation with my sister, but the director wasn't having it. She told me that if I wanted to argue, I could leave. I attempted to explain again, but she told me I was arguing in front of the children and needed to stay off my phone or get out. So I hung up on her, walked out of the room, and left the children unsupervised. I quickly passed through the kitchen, which had a baby gate that swung closed behind me, and went home. The next evening, I got a call when I didn't show up for work. I had no intention of returning. The director chastised me for leaving and demanded to know when I would return. I reminded her that she had told me to leave, but apparently she didn't mean it right then. She asked me when I would come back. I asked her if she wanted me there, to which she responded with more accusations, saying I was playing games and treating her like she was stupid. I stood firm and told her, "If you want me there, I'll come back tomorrow as scheduled." She never directly answered, instead yelling that she was educated, having earned her general educational development diploma 5 years ago. Eventually, I hung up on her again. The aftermath. The next day, she called again and said if I wasn't coming back, I should come in and sign a resignation. A friend, who I had often vented to about the way they treated me, offered to accompany me for emotional support, knowing they would likely be on their best behavior with a witness present. When I arrived, they showed me a write-up for the baby gate, hitting the pregnant girl behind me when I left. My friend suggested I not sign it, and I agreed, since I was resigning anyway. I hadn't even known she was behind me, and why hadn't she caught the gate herself? I then read the resignation, which stated I was quitting effective immediately without 2 weeks' notice, and signed it. When it came to the write-up, they threatened that if I didn't sign, the pregnant girl would press charges. I thought it was ridiculous, but after some arguing, signed it, even though I didn't hit her intentionally, and nothing happened to her or the baby. I sincerely apologized to her because I never meant any harm. I left and never looked back. Nothing ever came of the police threat, and I'm pretty sure it was just a bluff. A week later, I got hired at another daycare, closer to home, as an actual teacher. It was great for about a year, but then they started cutting my hours when the owner's daughter became pregnant and needed a job. We were told to share a classroom. When I was reduced to working just 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, I stopped showing up, and they never called me. I never signed a resignation. Both jobs, by the way, paid minimum wage. Story 6. Backstory: I'm a pizza delivery driver, and most of our business comes from a large college campus nearby. This means we often deal with drunk, stoned, annoying, or just plain inconsiderate college students who place orders. To top it off, we rarely get tipped for these deliveries. So, here's what happened. I was doing my usual deliveries to the campus, which involves calling the customers to meet me outside their dorm since the doors are locked, and only students have access. The next day, I got a text from my boss asking if I remembered delivering to a particular student. She gave me his name and phone number so I could check my call log. Sure enough, I had called that number the previous night, and I distinctly remembered that specific customer because his name was on the order. Let's call him Chad. My boss told me that Chad had called the shop, complaining that he never received his order. She checked the order details and confirmed that I was the driver who delivered it. There's a record of every order, showing which driver takes it, along with customer information. This infuriated me because I knew for a fact I had delivered Chad's order. I even remembered what he looked like and what he was wearing. Chad had filed a complaint with corporate, saying he never received his order and wanted a refund. His argument was that I gave the food to a random person who signed his credit card receipt and took his food. This didn't make sense. If I had given his order to the wrong person, wouldn't he have called me immediately asking where I was? If I had food on the way and the driver said they were outside, but I hadn't received it, I would have called right back to find out what happened. But Chad waited until the next day to complain. No way. There was no chance this guy was getting a refund for food he had clearly already eaten. I called his phone number and said, "Hi, this is your Domino's driver, the one who delivered to you last night. I'm not sure why you're claiming you didn't get your food when I remember handing it to you, so you won't be getting a refund." He hung up on me. A couple of weeks went by, and I guess Chad had moved on because another order came through with his name on it. This was my opportunity to confront him face to face. I arrived at campus and tried calling him, but the call wouldn't go through. He had blocked my number. So I asked someone if I could borrow their phone. When he answered, I said, "Hi, this is your Domino's driver. Remember me? I'm going to need you to come down with your credit card and ID, so I can make sure I'm giving this order to the right person." He hung up again without saying a word. A minute later, a girl came down to pick up the order on his behalf. I told her, "Sorry, but I need him to come down since last time he claimed I gave the food to the wrong person." Eventually, Chad came out, clearly the same guy from before. He recognized me right away, snatched the food out of my hands, and ran off without signing the credit card receipt. Now, here's the thing. If a customer doesn't sign the receipt, we can't process the payment, meaning they're essentially stealing the food as confirmed by my manager. So, I called the campus police. They informed me that if Chad didn't sign the receipt, he could be arrested for larceny. The police arrived, went up to his dorm, and brought him downstairs. The look on his face was priceless. He begrudgingly signed the receipt and, of course, left no tip. You'd think after all this, Chad would stop ordering from us, right? Wrong. He kept trying to place orders, but each time, we had to cancel them. He's now permanently blacklisted from our shop. Ha! Don't mess with this delivery girl.